Imagine three minds linked in four ways. We are three minds today. I'm with Thomas Gajdosik at Vilnius University. We're meeting by Zoom with John Harland at Palomar College. I am Andrius Kulikauskas. This is Math for Wisdom. And today I want to talk about the three minds, but specifically some very advanced research in wondrous wisdom that I've worked on for maybe 30 years, since the 1990s, to try to understand these eightfold structures. There's four families of them. And so it's always been a mystery, how would I unify that? And I'm making progress on that because about 12 years ago, I started thinking in terms of three minds. If you've read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about system 1 and system 2. And then I also posit that there's a system 3. And this is based on operations on divisions of everything, adding a perspective or adding a perspective on a perspective or adding a perspective on a perspective on a perspective. And so what I'm going to talk about, I'll give an introduction to the three minds by looking at this Theory Translator. It's a database of examples from the history of world culture, including what we know of evolution. And then I will talk about these four frameworks, but basically they all have 8 perspectives. So 3 of them come from what I call the unconscious or the answering mind, the mind that knows the answers. And 3 of them come from what I call the conscious mind, the questioning mind, the mind that does not know but asks questions. And there's a third mind, which is the investigating mind, which links the answers with the questions. So, and that's what we call consciousness. It's when we're fully deliberative, cognizant, willful. So what I'm realizing is that in each case of these structures, the answering mind models all 3 minds, and the questioning mind models all 3 minds, but the investigatory mind lives like in a void. So it doesn't think in terms of these minds, but it thinks in terms of relating the questions with the answers. And it also just stands on its own. So to 3 plus 3, we also add 1 plus 1. That's how we get 8. And when it does this, it can have, it can basically be not there, so to speak, or independent, like no channels. Or there could be one channel that connects the answering and questioning mind, or there could be 2 channels, or there could be 3 channels. So those are the 4 possibilities that I'll try to run through. This will just be a sketch, but I'm trying to share. So do either of you have any sense of what I mean by the 3 minds?
Well, from our previous conversations, yes.
So how would you describe the 3 minds, John?
Well, I mean, like as you described to me, it's sort of like the answering mind is sort of the BS part of the mind, where it's like the statistical learning. To make a AI analogy, it's sort of like the statistical learning part of the mind, where based on patterns, it thinks it knows what the answer is. The questioning part of the mind is more of a logical edifice that generates generates questions that may be answered by the answering part of the mind, or may not, but it's got a more, I think of it as more the knowledge map part of the mind. I might be wrong there, but
That sounds good. Sure, keep going.
and then the investigative part of the mind kind of links the two. When there's tension between the two, it intervenes. There's a question, there's an answer, they don't quite match up, and there's an emotional response, and you then reach deep into a different mode of cognition, where you try to resolve the difference by um, by means of somehow linking the two up, or comparing and contrasting the two to come up, to jostle things up a bit so that maybe you can get a better solution. Anyway, that's my It's kind
And
of
that's fantastic. You get an A+, and you're one of the few people in the world verified to understand these three minds.
well,
Congratulations.
I probably
Shout
have
out
spent
to Daniel
more
Friedman.
time
Shout
listening
out.
to you than more.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very good. Thomas, anything to add to that?
Not really.
Okay, we'll keep going. So then I'll give examples. And when we look at the examples, I think you'll kind of see on the one hand, well, that examples help. I'm trying to encourage people to collect these examples. So you can see there's a link up here, add an example, and then I curate them because it takes some work to, curate them. You'll also see they kind of conflict in some way, but I have this intuition developed, so I'm trying to, you'll also see patterns that they repeat. And so one of the projects I talked to about with Thomas today is to look at the different kind of patterns that come up in this database and then to show, okay, well, how are they organized? How to make sense of all these patterns? And I think that that relates maybe to Bott periodicity. So when I first got interested in the divisions of everything and their eightfold cycle, I was 17 when I started. I was 24 when I kind of realized they made a cycle, and I realized that they had these three operations where you can add a perspective, or two perspectives, or three perspectives, and you moved modulo 8 around this eightfold clock. And now that I have a lot more intuition about the three minds, and I realize, actually starting with that Kahneman's book that my sister gave me, I realized, these two minds at least are these operations, and there should be a third mind. And so now I look back at all my philosophy and I go, oh, wow, it really is a skeleton key to have this notion of the three minds. And I'm looking to collect examples in world culture, and it just keeps coming up in different ways. So I'll go through that, some of them, but we'll see that they conflict. But one of the hypotheses I have is that there should be 8 different contexts or 8 different angles. So that would be another way of understanding Bott periodicity, is that if you have these three minds, there's 8 things that they'd like to operate on, or 8 contexts that kind of like set them. Now, there may be 12 or there may be something more. We'll have to see. But they go back 500 million years at least. And that was when fish appeared, vertebrates appeared. And so they had left brain, right brain. And so there are people, neurobiologists, psycholinguists, who reviewed that evidence in an article for Scientific American. And so what they think when they look at all the evidence was that one side of the brain was environmentally motivated and one was self-motivated. So one way to think of these brains in terms of the way I think of it is that there's levels of distillation, kind of like there's levels of parsing. So a first perspective is you just distill the environment. And what do you end up if you still distill the environment? You end up an answer, okay? So that's the first mind. And so it'd be about the environment. It's environment motivated. But then you can try to model yourself and your own attention. Okay, so let's say you want to model your own attention as part of that. So you're distilling the distillation. So then you have this concept of the self, and so that would be self-motivated. And then the third part would be to say, well, presumably there's a tipping point. Like, there's things that, how do you fit into the environment with yourself, or what's the boundary like? How do you modulate that boundary? So once you have these two, there's probably a third distillation of the distillation of the distillation. That would be, so we don't know and that would be whatever is linking these two brains. Maybe it's the basal ganglia, or maybe it's some kind of system, who knows? But around that same time, the immune system developed in a more sophisticated way, so that now there were 2 immune systems. There was an innate pre-configured immune system, but there was also an adaptive immune system. So there was an immune system that could learn to deal with new problems. Then the question is, well, so there's one that kind of knows, and there's a mind that does not know, but can, let's say, be interested to learn. And what do you do to make sure that these function well together? There's got to be some kind of coordination. So that would be the third mind. There's going to be some kind of tipping point nexus, some kind of mechanism. And so people have autoimmune diseases, for example. So immunity may be one way that systems developed, even on the cellular level, they have immunity of different kinds. And so maybe that's one way, over billions of years that this crept in. The thesis is that this is also for different systems. Octopuses and squids also have these brain hemispheres, which is interesting because they have 8 legs, or was it 12 legs or whatever. Why would they need 2 brain hemispheres? But the fact is that they do. And so again, if you look from the user requirements to say you have a brain that knows, logically you have the dual, a brain that does not know, you want to have the same information in 2 different forms and decide which one is it better to work with. So you get kind of these contrasting. So the brain that knows is actually maybe interested in novel stuff, like peripheral vision, whereas the brain that does not know actually maybe manages the routine stuff. Why would that be? Because the novel stuff is things it's completely new. You have no mechanisms to deal with it, so it's low-level response, like, something in your peripheral vision that maybe is scary or just strange, right? If everything in your field of view turned green or red, like these are very weird things, you would not have any mechanisms to deal with that probably. Whereas things that are routine are things that you have higher order mechanisms. And so for routine things, you have a double perspective. You can say, well, I have this algorithm and the algorithm has slots, and those are supposedly things that I don't know, but I fill those slots. So I have slots and I have things in the slots and I'm managing them both. So that would be the second mind. But the third mind would say, yeah, and how well are you managing that? Like, what are you really doing there? So it really takes a lot of intuition to go through this. Any comments on this so far? Not really. So
Yeah,
just
I
to run
mean,
through,
it seemed a little backwards to me that the novel, um,
the
that
novel is what you know, and the routine is what you don't know, right? Like then,
yeah.
and so I'm saying, there can be debates about this. That's why it's important to have a team of people working on this, a culture of people working on this. But given my intuition, I'm curating this very carefully, and I'm saying, look, Andrius, yeah, that would be the easy way to do it. But what's actually going on here? Well, there's a couple reasons. First of all, they're saying that the right brain, which would be the left-handed side, which would be the intuitive side, that's the one that deals with novelty. The left brain, which is the right hand, that's the one that deals with routine. So I'm kind of saying, okay, well, what are they finding, right? But the other thing is to say, which maybe is more important even, is to say, look, when you have novel information, that means you're not prepared for it in some level. It's completely new, right? Like, so you don't have mechanisms that are built up. You don't have a symbolic mechanism or a logical system. Novel things are not logical. That's the point.
Mm.
Routine things are logical, you see. So novel things, because they're not logical, they're just like the BS thing. You use your BS mind to deal with it. You connect the dots. The routine thing, the idea is that, well, there's a double mind at work there. Like, you have a routine, an algorithm. The algorithm has slots. It could deal with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, situations. But you also have, it's monitoring the things you know. But it's dealing with the things you know in terms of this mechanism logically designed, in terms of things you don't know. That's the interpretation I would give. Does that at least?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah. So see,
a little bit
this is
clearer.
not an easy thing to think, and I could be wrong, or I could, it's very dangerous to. So maybe to go through history just quickly, like, the Greeks are very early, but like, beauty, goodness, and truth. So like the Herodotus talks about the Athenians who talked about the warrior, the ideal warrior is beautiful and virtuous. And so I think the and is basically saying true, that the virtue and the beauty line up. So beauty is what the purity that the first mind would be attracted to. The intuitive mind is just going to tune into beauty, whereas the logical mind, the rational mind, is going to tune into what is either functionally good or morally good or mechanically good, or purposefully good, but it tunes into that. The third mind tunes into the truth, like how are those two things matching up? Does that make sense? Or
Uh,
and so
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I would have independently come up with that, but
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
I mean, these are things like,
in your explanation makes sense. Yeah.
and just to know, like, I collect these things. So like something like beauty, good, and true, I've heard maybe 40 years ago, and I just thought that just completely discombobulated. It just doesn't make sense. Why would you take those three things and jumble them together? But see, once you have the three minds, it realizes, oh, the three minds are a jumble, and that's why it makes sense of these jumbly types of things. That's at least where I'm at right now. Another one, though, you start to get like with Socrates, like, and I'll quote him here. Although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, it's kind of interesting, he repeats that. I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing and thinks that he knows. I neither know nor think that I know. So when you tease it all apart, it's like, well, somebody can think they know. That's the bullshit mind, right? But he knows nothing. And also, he's aware that he knows nothing. He's conscious, right? So those are the three levels. But you can compare that, let's say, with Confucius down here. And I date these according to when the written text was available. Because like Confucius lived longer ago. Okay, so here is Confucius. The master said, You, shall I teach, Yo, I think is his name. Yo is his student. Shall I teach you what knowledge is? When you know a thing, to hold that you know it. And when you do not know a thing, to allow that you do not know it. This is knowledge. Okay? So knowing, not knowing, and then admitting whether you know or not. You see, and so that follows, it's very, I'm trying to say Confucius talked about the three minds, you see, like, but I can talk about Jesus, and this is a famous passage of his, where is it here? Oh, in the Gospel of John. No, 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 no. Oh, here it is, in the Sermon on the Mount. This lamb here. And I use my brother, Andrius Kulikauskas, this is his work he did for his master in fine arts. This lamb, he did Jesus from a contemporary point of view, like his sayings, like how to describe them. So he's trying to say the things that Jesus says, like let's say they're covered up. So that was like the intention of this, like Jesus in the world. But now let's compare it to this reading, which I use to illustrate. He goes, Again, you have heard that it was said to the ancient ones, Oh, you shall not make false vows, but shall perform to the Lord your vows. But I tell you, don't swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is the throne of God, nor by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shall you swear by your head, for you can't make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Whatever is more than these is of the evil one. See, so when you go through these patterns, and I get stuck in these patterns in my mind, like when he says, let your yes be yes, let's say the question is, do you know? And he's saying, if you know, say you know. If you don't know, say you don't know. And anything more is not good. So from that point of view, it's just, maybe I'm got, well, this worm has eaten through my brain. But does that make sense what I'm seeing here?
I cannot connect it.
You can't. Do you see it, John, or not?
Maybe slightly. If you know that something is, if you intrinsically know that something is true, that's sort of like the answering part of your mind. On the other hand, if there's some doubt as to whether something is, you know something or something is true, that's kind of a logical
Yeah, that's the
part of your
questioning part of
mind
your mind. You
kicking in.
doubt, right?
And and
And there's an integrity part of the mind.
right, that that kind of keeps both in their place.
Yeah, or like just give a couple more examples and go to like three wishes, right? Like, so there's a story, so the author of Cinderella, it turns out these were all authored by a person, but there's three wishes. So Jupiter gives three wishes to this grumbling woodcutter, and then the woodcutter comes home and he tells his wife, he's sitting by the fire, it's kind of cold, he's hungry, and he wishes for sausages. Then his wife, and he gets these sausages appear. Even his wife gets upset. She goes, you used up a wish, right? Like we've got to think about this and etc. And she berated him. And then he wished that they were hanging from her nose, and so then she is like, what are we going to do? And then it's like she convinced him that he's got a wish for them to get off her nose. And so that goes away. So the point is that those are the three minds. There's the one mind with the appetite that wanted the sausages. There's another kind of bullying mind, that's like using logic and rationality. And so I don't want these to hang on your nose, right? And then there's a third mind that maybe is trying to step in and solve the problem and say, just get rid of this, So I think the point is that a lot of things may have these three minds if we look in deep to them, and that can be quite skeptical too. So any concluding thoughts on this? I think I'll go to the next part.
Yeah, I think it's quite a few examples there. They're not necessarily easy to independently navigate through that.
I think they're impossible to do except if you describe them. And if you describe them, okay, I mean, I don't know how to use it. It's like, okay, it's there.
Well, obviously it takes practice or some kind of obsession or just brain damage. We'll see. So, but I'm trying to say that, this is something we do together. Now, you were here, I talked to you previously about Bott periodicity for Clifford algebra maniacs. So the point being a couple things, but first I just want to say I was contacted by Fabrice Favre, who has made a Clifford algebra explorer, which is very handy for us. So if you go to this website, he lists out all the Clifford algebras, up to Bott periodicity, the real ones at least, and you can go to your favorite Clifford algebra, say this is maybe related to Minkowski space, why not? And so you can go click on it, and then if you click on this, space-time algebra, and all kinds of descriptions, what are the elements, what's the Cayley table to multiply them. You can use a calculator. And what's very important for me and for John maybe is these matrix representations and these custom matrix representations, and goes on. So he's fabulous. I'm in touch with him, and so I'm really looking forward to learning from him. So congratulations. Thank you for creating that for us all to use. And so last time there was this pattern that there were two Clifford algebras. Now, Bott periodicities. So the one that we're trying to decode, or I'm trying to decode, is to say, if you keep applying linear complex structures and they're mutually anti-commuting, you get sets of them. And I suspect that they are basically organized as the division of everything into perspectives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But there's another way to organize it where, like, you can go, and these all square to -1 when you have the generators. But you could have this generator square to +1 or -1, and then it turns out that the Clifford algebra plus and -4, that'll be the isomorphic, it'll be the same. And so if you look at these two, and you look at these quantum symmetries, time reversal, charge conjugation, and how they all relate, you get this very curious pattern, it's highly symmetric, and it goes round. And what happens, though, is that the 0 here and the 0 here are off by 2 or off by 6, however you think about it. So like the division of everything into 6 perspectives would be the same as this starting point for the other view. Oh, and you go 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3. So basically, what I'll be talking to you now is to say the -6 is going to be given by the ways that the answering mind and the questioning mind model all three minds. So you get 3 plus 3 is 6. The consciousness is going to be given by this internal circle. The consciousness is going to be the investigating mind. It'll either be 0 channels or 1 channel or 2 channels or 3 channels. So 0 will be the body and its needs and how we deal with that. Plus 1 will be the mind and the doubts and how we address those. Plus 2 is the heart, our emotional life, and how we deal with that. Plus 3 is the will, like that we're centered in, and how that relates to God's will. That's all here. That's what I want to describe to you. So here's the eightfold divisions of everything as they make this circle. You're familiar with that. And so this is what the divisions of everything look like. And these are the three operations, which are the three minds. So for example, if your mind is thinking about whether this cup exists or not, that's 2 points of view. But because you have to be able to ask the question, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't, like with free will. But if it exists, it exists. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. That's like fate. That's all the same. There's no opposites there. So for existence, you need those 2 points of view. If you have full consciousness of that, basically what you would do, I think what the mind does in my picture of it, it takes this and it models it as an algorithm, let's say. So that'd be like +2. It says, well, how could I take a cup and think of it as a machine? Well, it would be like an outside and an inside. If you're outside the cup, it also has an inside, so that kind of makes sense that, you have a cup, you have water inside, my hand is outside, my gut is outside, let's say, of the cup. But if you fall inside the cup, there's only inside, there is no outside, which may mean, like, for example, that, well, like we fall in the universe, there is no outside of the universe, okay? If you fall in the cup, it may mean that, well, it's all about the water. The water is now in your mouth, in your gut, and everything is the inside of the cup. So that's maybe a crazy way to think, but that's the order. Outside can become inside, but not the other way around. Once you're stuck inside the universe, you can't get out of it. It doesn't make sense. There's no way to cognitively think that. Now, if you have this machine and you have two copies, one where it's on and one where it's off, that would be like theory and practice. Theory is like a machine that is off. You can imagine it. You can kind of imagine going through it. But once the machine is on, your imagination is going through it, complementing. It's like a carrot in the middle. It's like there's no distinction. So when things are off, there's a distinction between the one who would turn it on and turn it off. But when things are on, it's like everything is on. They're all part of this one experience. The difference between theory, let's say, and experience, or theory and practice. So in order to have consciousness of this cup, I need to be able to make an algorithm of it. I need to be able to turn that algorithm on or off and have control over that. So I need 5 points of view, and you have that with decision-making in space and time. You have these two directions where every effect has had its cause looking backwards, and every cause, not every cause has had its effect going forwards. So like that, every effect has had its cause going backwards. That's almost like the first mind. That's about what is. But in terms of what is not, or what has not happened, you can say not every cause has had its effects looking forward. So there's these two directions of causality, and the present is where they're balanced. So that's what you get when you have consciousness of this existence. In your mind, if someone were to photograph it, they would see all 5 points of view because you had 2 and you added 3. That was what I figured out. I was 24 years ago. That's what made me realize this is an 8 cycle. This was from studying Kant's transcendental deduction and his critique of pure reason. It turns out he was talking about something else, but that's what stimulated this all. Any thoughts on this? Does this?
Connecting with the books, no chance I didn't read them. So
Okay. John, does this anything?
Thoughts make sense. I mean, this presentation is not illogical to me.
Yes, that's very good. Good answer. John, I'm going to counterpoint.
Yeah, there's still something I'm trying to come to grips with. It's
okay.
There's
that's
a lot
fair.
packed in here, but yeah, and I mean, I recognize a lot of what you're saying.
Mostly because I just keep repeating at a certain point. It's familiarity. So what we're doing here is we're saying this 6 sum is very important because, well, let me show you a pattern. I don't know if you can see in yellow here, but there's this 4 sum which connects how and what is one axis. It's like the first mind's knowledge, and why and whether would be, let's say, the second mind's knowledge. And there's no connection needed. They're just functioning in parallel. Basically, when the how becomes the what, okay? Like in architecture, form follows function. So first you have a function for a building, and then that determines what the building looks like. Then it's kind of like, basically like the why is the consciousness. So the first mind sees what? The answering mind sees what? The questioning mind organizes how. The investigating mind knows why. The investigating mind is the answering mind has emotions. It's saying, look, the models are not working. We got to do something. The how mind, the questioning mind, would be happy to create new models, but the why mind is saying, wait, don't impose the new model until I tell you. Okay? When I tell you, then, when we feel peace, then I'll tell you, we'll impose it. So then the how becomes the what, and then the why can become the whether. So we are able to lose consciousness, but consciousness is like a brake that keeps the conscious from becoming unconscious. It keeps a brake. So like in neuroscience, you have things that are subconscious or pre-conscious, they're happening. Then you have a conscious mind kick in. So let's say the first 300 milliseconds are just before you have awareness. Then you have 300 milliseconds of awareness, but there seems to be a delay. Like, even if everything's resolved, there's something that seems to be forcing the mind to keep processing for a while. Maybe something, will be interesting. So I'm hypothesizing that would be the third mind, is present as a thing that forces you to keep processing even when you feel you're finished. So this here, there's just a gap. Then the present is how we explain, like, so the first mind leans back in the present, let's say, and the second mind leans forward, but in the gap is the present. The first mind leans back in the past. The second mind looks predictive in the forward. The investigatory mind is in the present, relating that. Then you get pairs. So those three pairs form a 3 cycle. That's for morality. But basically, it's 2 copies of the 3 models of the unconscious and conscious that we're building on. And then you can add 1, 2, or 3 perspectives. So going around the clock, if you have 0, you just are where you are. This is what you need for morality. If you add 1, you get a logical system where you have these 2 sides, like all is known, and there exists something known, and all is known, and there exists something known, or all is unknown, there exists something unknown, and taken together. And then the consciousness would say, yeah, but there could also be exists unknown and exists an unknown. But when you add another perspective, it's like all are known, all are unknown, the whole thing will collapse. You'll get 0, and then you'll go back to unity. So we're going to we're going to be modeling this way of going over the thing. So I'll give you structures for that. And this is just a close-up view of the 6. I'm saying basically, like, when you're going around the learning cycle, like taking a stand, following through, and reflecting, at each point you can have a relative question saying, well, I take a stand, but do I follow through? Do I put your money where your mouth is, so to speak? I follow through, but do I reflect? Like, do you stop to think about what you're doing? I reflect, but do I take a stand? Like, hey, make up your mind. Do you ever make up your mind? So that's what morality is all about, but also absolutely to say, look, I take a stand from a relative point of view, but maybe can I follow through? Absolutely. Can I reflect? Absolutely. Can I take a stand? Absolutely. So this is all fitting to what it means to be human. And in this case, the consciousness is not, one way to look at this is to say the consciousness is not apparent. So we're going to look at how consciousness gets injected in this. And the way this is organized is in terms of, well, this consciousness is basically like God transcending, I'll say herself, just to be gender fair. But so in transcending, God is kind of showing, like, what would happen if, is God necessary? Would there be God if there was not? God is going beyond herself, but she has to go into herself. So she has to kind of create herself. So in that process, if you look from the side, there are like 4 different zones. Like, she can be initially totally outside of herself. She can be totally inside of herself. She could be entering herself, looking from the outside, or entering herself, looking from the inside. So, receiving herself, let's say. So, and this is like, these are scopes are wishes for nothing, wishes for something, wishes for anything, wishes for everything. So we're human, we don't wish for nothing. God is self-sufficient, but we have needs, bodies with needs. God wishes for something is certain. We have minds with doubts. God wishes for anything is calm. We have hearts with expectations. God wishes for everything is loving. But we have wills with values. I've told you all this before, so maybe you want to add something about this, but I want to show you these structures in red, what they look like. Any thoughts so far? And so these are the equations that I kind of mentioned on that cycle, like 3 plus 3 plus 0 is 6, 3 plus 3 plus 1 is -1, 3 plus 3 plus 2 is 0, 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 1. So when we have -1, 0, 1, and we're starting with 6, that's matching back up to here where we were. This +1, 0, -1. So that would be the thing to look for. In this case, it's time reversal. So is it real, complex, or quaternion structure that the time reversal is establishing? That's kind of like what we're saying here, or I'm guessing to be saying here. So the first thing I noticed with regard to the needs, and I made a video about this recently. So here's the three minds, is that one way to distinguish between the unconscious and the conscious, as I call them, the answering mind and the questioning mind. Are they concerned? What are they concerned about? So this is needs. Are they concerned for the known past or for the unknown future? So if you're modeling, the unconscious then has three minds it's modeling. And so one mind is concerned for the past, one mind is concerned for the future, and one mind is just concerned in general. So like this is the unconscious, this is the conscious. The conscious is just concerned in general about their relationship, or not concerned at all. So if your attitude is that you're concerned for the past, which you know, and then you're modeling yourself the concern for the past, then it's all about survival. Like survival, the idea is that survival is, and you cling to what you have, and so you're just based on integrating where you are at. And I have these operating principles here, I think, like, so the need for survival, you cling to what you have. The need for security, which would be like survival for tomorrow, which is like leaning for tomorrow, you get more than what you need so that you could have something to lose, so that you could cling to what you have. And then the social is that, well, you worry so that everybody could cling to what they have. So you avoid extremes, you don't rock the boat, so they could cling. So here, looking forward in the model from the past, it's saying, well, okay, survival is looking to the past, but security would be looking to the future. And concern in general would be the social need. Okay, that's just concern in general, where you forget about yourself, you forget about others. If you don't distinguish yourself, then you can just be social. Now, if you're leaning forward, like the conscious mind does, then the unconscious, all these things you've built up, that's about your self-esteem, what it's worth looking forward. But in order to be able to have self-esteem, so you choose the good over the bad for self-esteem. You choose the good over the bad. To be able to have self-esteem tomorrow, you need opportunity to choose the better over the worse. They both may be both bad, but one is better. So you'll position yourself better even in bad situations. And then finally, to be able to let anybody have self-esteem, you want to be extreme so that they could choose the good over the bad. So you choose the best over the rest. So that's how you satisfy your need for self-fulfillment. So if we look back up here, modeling these minds, the conscious mind models the unconscious, saying, well, that's all about self-esteem. The conscious mind models itself by saying it's all about freedom. And then the conscious models the consciousness concern in general, saying, well, this is about self-fulfillment, matching this up. So this is the model. And so for concern in general, I didn't put this in here, but the consciousness would care about taking up the needs of another. So you can ignore your own needs by taking up the needs of another. That's what the consciousness does. It says it doesn't think in terms of its own, it doesn't have any needing models. Or to have no needs, you're just be perfect. Okay, you can just say, hey, maybe I don't happen to have any needs, like my grandmother watching Oprah on television. So any thoughts on this? And I'll just add that here there's a connection, there's a parallelism between these two models, but there's no real active channel between them. It's just zero. The consciousness is not adding anything. Does any of this seem interesting or plausible or just curious?
Yeah, it's gotten to a level of density now where it's very difficult to follow. And even though I've heard you talk about this before.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something I would have to review and
Right. And so then
multiple times.
in this case, you also have this issue of like, well, when I apply all these operating principles, am I applying them to myself or am I applying them to God? Like, so instead of clinging to my own self, If I clung to the glory of God, well, then God would resurrect me and give me eternal life, etc. So that's this option we have. Another thing, like, what are we applying this to? That the consciousness opens up. So I've talked to you both, and so I'll go through this very rapidly, but just to show where the research is. I've talked to you both about the doubts and the counter questions. So like, if I have this, I made a video about this, like, imagine I'm a robot, and then I doubt, like, well, maybe I am a robot. How do I deal with that doubt? Like, is that truly real, right? Like, so the way I would deal with it, I'd have the counter question, would it make any difference? And so there's all these counterquests, like, do I truly like this? How does it seem to me? Do I truly need this? What else should I be doing? Is this truly real? Would it make any difference? Is this truly problematic? What do I have control over? Is this truly reasonable? Is this the way things should be? Is this truly wrong? Am I able to consider the question? And there's one that goes up. Am I doing anything about this? So I've told you guys this before, but what this has a single channel. And so I take a perspective and I put it in a situation, let's say like looking over my shoulder. Like, so if a person particular looks over my shoulder into the world, they'd say, well, how does it seem to me? But if it's a person in general looking over their shoulder, they say, well, what else should I be doing? But if God was looking over my shoulder, looking at the world, God would say, is this the way things should be? If a person in general is looking at the situation of a person in particular, they'd say, well, would it make any difference? But if God is looking at a person in general, it's saying, well, what do they have control over? If they're looking at a personality, like a person in particular, they say, well, are they able to consider the question? And then if they're looking at the world, then they would say, like I said before, is this the way things should be? And if a person in particular is looking up towards a person in general, they could say, well, are they doing anything about this? So I'll just for the sake of brevity, I'll cut through this, but I want to show how these doubts appear in the same model. So here, the answering mind is talking about what is conditioned, and the questioning mind is the condition that the conditioned is put in. So if you're the one in who's conditioned, in the situation, and you model these three minds, well, the conditioned, with regard to the conditioned, it's about liking. It's like about familiarity. Like, I've seen this before, I like this, this is what the issue is. Whereas putting the conditioned, from the view of the conditioned, what do these conditions look like? They look like needs. Like, okay, does this satisfy what's needed or whatever? And then the unconditional, from the view of the condition, is about reality. So the things that are, so for example, how does it seem to me? Well, one way to answer that would be like, it seems to me that's real. The things that are real are the things that appear to me. The other one would be the things that are real are the things that don't appear because they're unconditional. They happen to be there. So there's this truth of the world and truth of the heart, and you have this choice to be able to make. From the conditions point of view, the conditioned is problematic. Like, does it fit the condition or not? The conditions are reasonable. The unconditional is wrong if you have a condition. So I like how that all, I think it kind of makes sense. And then linking them is the unconditional, and then the idea that there could be, the unconditional has no condition. So that would be this area of no condition if it's on its own. Any thoughts about all this?
This was very abstract and in
Yeah.
some sense
I have to say,
not
I'm kind of
prepared for me to be understandable directly. I mean, it sounds not bad. It doesn't sound, there should be something that I would say, oh, that's wrong, but I cannot support it yet.
That's the right answer. It's reasonable. It's problematic. It's wrong. Everything's great. Real, need, like, yes. John?
yeah, it's a little again, it's gone it's level, that
I'm going to keep going. That's all
beyond
right.
me. Yeah.
It goes beyond that.
Yeah.
So now this is the emotional system about expectations. And see, so now we're going to have two channels because we have this different, I used to call it between the self and the world, or like our inside and the outside, or like, if you have alphabet blocks and you're trying to flip them over and see the ones that are close to you, maybe they have your sweetheart's name or whatever on them. That's where you know them very well. Whereas the ones farther away, they're kind of theoretical, you don't know them. So here's this distinction between the answering mind that knows things and the questioning mind that looks at things theoretically because it doesn't really know about them. So if you make expectations, because God wishes for anything, God is calm, but we don't wish for anything, we have expectations. And so we're waiting for those expectations. And so if they're met about things we care about, well, let's say they're met about things that we don't know much about. Theoretically, we're excited. And if it doesn't happen, we're surprised. But if we care a lot about it, if it happens that it is my sweetheart's name and everything's like, that's content. But if my sweetheart name disappeared, I'd be sad. It'd be devastating. So, but those are all healthy emotions. If I can't make an expectation, it's coming from the outside. Maybe it's too fast or too weird, or I just don't want to, then it's frightening. And if it's from the inside, it's disgusting. But the same, like, in terms of things I know versus things I don't know. And so if you're waiting, you're in suspense. And if you don't have expectations, you're at peace. So this is a model I've had for years. But now if I look at it from this point of view, I can say, well, it's about the unconscious mind is all about confirmation, what's known. The conscious mind is about what we don't know, that's disconfirmation. And the consciousness is about what's non-confirmable. So when the confirmation mind looks at these things, it's looking about the part I said was our self, right? So if it's confirmed, it's content. It's looking at the sad, disconfirmation, that's very sad. It's looking at the non-confirmable as disgusting. Whereas the conscious mind, the theoretical one, in terms of what we don't know, if it discovers confirmation, it's excited. If it discovers disconfirmation, it's surprised. But it's like yes, I mean it's surprised, but that's the game. If it's non-confirmable, it's frightened. If you're just waiting for the expectation, it's non-confirmable, it's suspense. If there's no expectation, you're at peace. Any thoughts on this one?
In some ways similar. It's like, it doesn't seem contradicting. It seems it might be okay. It's just too quick.
You're in suspense, non-confirmable.
I don't know.
How about you, John? What are you?
So I've heard you talk about this before for years, actually, many years back. So
Yeah.
you're putting this just in a different context, and you're kind of mapping it out in a different way than you used to. Is that?
Well, so you can imagine these are totally different structures, and I've always had this. I came up with these in the 90s. Okay, so you've known me for a long time. So you knew me before I came up with these.
Operating principles, yes.
Yeah, like all these structures. And so why would these are all like eightfold structures. Well, first of all, in the 90s, I realized that they're different. So, and I realized because I looked at the functions, what are they serving? And I realized like there's different families, there's 4 different families, they serve different purposes. But I didn't even know about the 3 minds back then. I was thinking in terms of 3 operations. So when I started realizing how central and how helpful the 3 minds are in terms of talking to people, then recently I came up with this one because I was making the video and I go, oh, this is the 3 minds. Oh, and then see, once you have this pattern, then like maybe a few weeks ago, I came up with the one for this one I came up with this morning. But this one I came up with a couple weeks ago, so that they're all fitting here. Then you start to see, 0 channel, 1 channel, 2 channel, like it's unraveling. Now, I had given a talk on the geometry of moods, and so there's these 6 transformations of 4 geometries. I think this is related to the classical Lie groups, but the idea is that if you have 0 coordinate systems, you have an affine, you have like a triangle. You can think of a triangle in terms of paths, and you don't need any coordinate systems to do that. You can just have wiggly lines. But if you have intersections of lines, okay, that's one dimensional coordinate systems. If you have angles, okay, you need pairs of coordinate system to have an angle. And then if you have oriented area, then you need 3 coordinate systems. So you can have these things, and then you can have 6 kinds of geometric transformations that shift you from one way of looking at a geometry to another. From one geometry to another, you get these things: reflection, shear, rotation, dilation, squeeze, translation. So the idea is that, and I did a study of poetry, and you've maybe seen that, where I look, if you take a mood as evoked by a poem, and you want to see how is that mood evoked, and you want to be able to re-evoke that or reproduce that or show that people agree, you realize that it's all about the boundaries, and these emotional systems are based on that boundary between the self and the world, and you can manipulate the boundary in these 6 ways, which are like Mobius transformations. And so I made a video about that talk. So then I realized that, well, these relate, they have to relate to the same, they relate to the same thing, but they relate to the ways of getting things done. So whatever emotion you have, Joe Damel was a community organizer, my old friend when I lived in Market Park in Chicago. And so we got together and talked about the ways of getting things done. But basically, they're related to these emotions. Like if you are content, you should delegate. If you are sad, you should retreat. If you're disgusted, you should speak up, make yourself heard. If you're excited, you should initiate. If you're surprised, you should articulate. If you're frightened, you should confront. If you're in suspense, you have sheer will. If you're at peace, you respond. So those are like very good instructions on what to do given on your emotional situation that tells you how you should deal with the situation. So the idea that I just recently had was that, well, those playing with the line, like delegating is about reflecting in the sense that when you have a reflection, like you see the moon in the sky, it sees you, well, that means that you are, it's this confirmation. And if you're confirming, if you're in agreement, then you can delegate. Whereas like if things are not confirmed, like with a shear, means that one dimension may be fine, but there's another dimension that just kind of like is moving independently. You want to maybe get rid of that. You want to retreat from that dimension. Or if it's like rotating, that's just too weird. So maybe you want to speak up or, be speaking up about that. That's maybe a strange one. Dilation, I guess that's a confirmation that things that you would initiate. Squeeze is this disconfirmation, but you want to measure how the shape of the box is changing. You would measure or articulate. The non-confirmable here would be like when you're, I guess, from the point of view of disconfirmation. Anyways, it's translating, you would confront. So this is maybe rather strange, but it's a powerful way of looking at these things, saying that these ways of getting things done. See, you have 2 channels. You have the emotional channel, but you also have the action channel. So going back and forth, you have these 2 ways of working this out. What do you guys think?
Again, it's
The
very
ordering
difficult to follow.
a little bit pushed, a little bit
Forced.
but I mean, it doesn't also feel that it's wrong yet. It's like at least unexpected. And sometimes the word I think that you use are not, in that sense, helping to see the logic why it should be there.
Yeah, these are early days, and so these will went into shape. The nice thing is that, like for example, the study of poems, I studied 39 poems from the Tang Dynasty. They're short poems, and it was very nice to have empirical data. So this is the kind of thing like it's a hypothesis; it can be tested. So improved, rejected. I'll just skip through these. Oh, just to mention here, like one way to kind of relate this is also like I studied the gospel maybe of Luke and looked at how Jesus showed goodwill, and he showed goodwill based on his emotional, I think this is the gospel of Mark, because it was an emotional study of Jesus. When was he frightened? Well, like what was his based on his emotional responses, what is his expectation? I think his expectation is that we're all the same, basically. And then it turned out to be, well, that we're all one. And then so based on how that played out, he would have different emotions. I have to double check on that. So now the final one, the will, the values, and investigatory conditions and visualizations. I think it makes use of these visualizations which restructure trees, network sequences. So if you take a tree and it's super big, but then you make a sequence out of it. That's like, so like let's say you have a tree of how the species are diverging, and you synchronize them with time as time goes out, you get an evolution. Whereas if you did the opposite, if you had a huge sequence and you organized it with a tree, you would get a chronicle of shorter and longer time periods. Or if you had a network and you had a map of global and local views, and they formed a tree, that would be an atlas. If you did the opposite, if you had a huge tree and you used a network to kind of like link across it, it would be a catalog. And if you had a long sequence and then you put in some cross loops and managed it with a network, then you would have a workflow. Whereas if you had a complicated network and you walk through it with a sequence, you have an odyssey. So the idea is that you never really use one of these three building blocks, tree, web, or sequence. You always use pairs. The unconscious will have some hugely massive data. The conscious will have a little control mechanism that has to be of a different kind because you have to be able to distinguish what's the conscious, what's the unconscious. So you'll get these visualizations and you always have this gap, which is where paradox happens. So I gave a classification of paradox based on these problems with visualization. We talked today about your car and the ship of Theseus, where like if you replaced all the parts, is it the same? You have two cars, are they the same car? Which is the same car? So it happens with these gaps, basically. Anyway, so the eightfold structures, there's three of them. And so I learned about it from Buddha's Eightfold Way, but basically I noticed that in Christianity, our Father has that structure. The Beatitudes on the Sermon on the Mount have that structure. And there's in St.Peter's level, there's these from faith to love, there's these 8 steps from faith to, virtue, to knowledge, to self-control, to right livelihood, to right endeavor, to endurance, to prayerfulness, to brotherhood, to love. There's a sequence, and it's very similar to Buddha's Eightfold Way. So, but the point being, like if I take, let's say, our Father as an example, you have and I think you have 3 channels here, and I would suspect that they're going to be related to these 3 building block structures, data structures. But basically, like when I pray Our Father in heaven, I'm praying to God who loves me more than I love myself, wants me to be alive more than I myself want to. So I'd rather that God think than I think, that God be than I be, that God do than I do. But a lot of times I'm not in touch with God, so then I need to use the learning cycle. I ask God, look, let me, give me my daily bread so I could follow through on my stands. Forgive me my sins so I could look at what I do, reflect on my actions. Lead me not into temptation so I could make decisions based on what I think, So, protect me so I could take a stand based on my thoughts and just be a good enough God and, delivering from evil. So the idea being that this being and doing and thinking, this 3 cycle of learning, this is the framework for that. That's the most important way of kind of like living cognizantly, is living with this 3 cycle, but you need to have the right context. And there's 3 different ways that can go depending on the organization of this thinking, being, and doing. And so these 4 levels, the 2 different ways of looking at these 4 levels, the relationship between these 2, which is given by the 2, this is super compact, most intense structure, let's say, and it's that framework. And so this, I would suspect, and so I have to work on it, but so then the idea would be to try to put that in the same model here, where like being and doing and thinking, let's say, could fit in here, and those data structures could fit in there, like the tree and the web and the sequence, and see if I can do that. So that's where the research is. Any thoughts on this?
I think you left us behind. You're too fast.
Yeah,
John?
it is sweeping through. I mean, like I say, I've been exposed to some of this or most of it before, but it's big, and I don't have my mind wrapped around it.
And John Baez is really cool. He is the one who gives talks on Bott periodicity. That's how I met Francis Howard and Jerry Northrup, and now another person. Posina from India. We all met through, probably from John Baez, at the category theory Zulipcha. But so he mentioned, we were talking about classification. He was kind enough to mention that when you look at free varieties in the classification of non-trivial varieties, there's 3 different kinds, times 2. You can have affine spaces, you can have sets, and you can have a category where it's just singletons, a set with 1 element. So they think about it in terms of categories. So it'd be like the category of all sets with 1 element. Or you could have the pointed version. So a pointed affine space would be a vector space where you have a distinguished point that plays the role of the origin. Or a set could have a distinguished point that would be called a pointed set. Or instead of just including all the singletons in the universe and having a category, you could also include the empty set. And so technically that would be called the non-pointed set version. But I'm saying that's the pointed set because you're basically taking a singleton and saying, this either I'm going to knock it out or I'm going to say like, this has to belong in every single set in the world, right? Like, so the thing that I call the empty set will be a singleton that I've made special to say it has to belong in everything. It's included in the definition of everything, right? So that's, I try to explain like cognitively, that's probably a nicer way to look at it. So these would be the three minds. The first mind is just talking about a, dimension. The second mind is talking about discrete points. The third mind is saying it's just one point at a time, right? Just a single point. So, and you have these two versions. So you have these two models. The unconscious mind would not have the point because it's just not thinking about that. But the conscious model would say there's a distinguished point, which is the self or me or whatever. So it's fast. Like, so when I see this, I get excited saying, look, it's the same six that we've been having here. Here, I'm saying those are the same six. Anyways. So I just maybe to ask if we conclude with a prayer. Thomas, would you end us with a prayer? And I want to pray for John Baez. I want to pray for all the people he's introduced me and the whole community to say, look, we're on the fringe here. They're kind of on the fringe on the other side of the fringe. So if our two minds can kind of bridge this gap, the people on the fringe, on the one side of the fringe, the people on the other side. I think that's lovely. I'm kind of waiting for that to happen. But I'm thankful for all that we're gaining from that.
Lord our God, you have given us a mind to grapple with all of creation that you have also entrusted to us. Let us look up to you and trust that you guide us to find each other and start to love each other more. And by finding this love, recognize that you love us more than we could ever love any other person or even our own being. Help us to show each other the fullness of your love and be by that testimonies of your goodness. Amen.
Well, you're both very wonderful. Thank you for your
and thank you for this grand sweep. It went beyond me. A large part of it went beyond me, but it was kind of a good global review of many conversations we've had over the years. I have to say I'm just still a neophyte when it comes to thinking this way. So, we kind of had a goal that we would sweep through Bott periodicity. I've gotten a little bit bogged down, but I tend to make good on that. And then, after that, we were going to study philosophy. And so I think that maybe this recording would be a good thing for me to review quite a few times, on that path, just to understand your mind better. So I think it's a good document that I think we created here. So at least from my own study point of view.
And I'm very happy for your friendship with Thomas that you got to meet here a few times when you're here. I'm starting to imagine the next trips we're gonna do.
Yeah.
But maybe Thomas and I can go to San Diego.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if there is enough time and enough money and enough possibility, I think it would be really, really nice.
Or we could maybe meet in Austria. That would be maybe possible.
That's
I don't know
possible.
if that's in the summertime. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe Julie would like Austria.
Yeah.
So There we are. And I just wanted to say I was very happy that you guys got to talk about physics. I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for watching this video. Please go to mathforwisdom.com or simply read the description to this video to learn how you can join our Math for Wisdom discussion group and our study groups. Thank you for liking this video, for subscribing to this YouTube channel, and for supporting Math for Wisdom through Patreon.
I became a Math for Wisdom Patreon supporter. I went to the webpage, patreon.com, found Math for Wisdom, and after just a few minutes of filling a few things out, boom, I was a Math for Wisdom Patreon supporter. You can do it too.